I built these pipe clamp racks a number of years ago for a completely different shop. They're okay, but they take up a lot of space. Recently, I discovered these dandy aluminum bar clamps, and I love them so much, I've bought 20 of them so far in lengths all the way up to 6 feet. But I don't have any space to store them, so they're upstairs. Not very 5S compliant of me, if you know what I mean. So I've come up with a design for a new, adjustable, reconfigurable, stacked clamp rack that we can make almost entirely out of scrap plywood. So let's get started. Any project I start starts with a list of design criteria. What is it I want to accomplish? Well, my first design criteria for a new clamp rack was to fit all my clamps into the same space I'm using now. And that means I need to store 2 or even 3 clamps in the space where I'm now storing 1. In other words, I need to double or triple my storage space. So that means configuring some type of bracket that will hold more than 1 clamp. Secondly, I want the system to be reconfigurable. I need to be able to change it as my clamp collection changes or grows. So my first thought was something like a metal shelf bracket. You've seen these. There's a shelf standard and a shelf bracket that clips in. The problem is that to remove or install a shelf bracket, you have to tilt it up to click it in, then lower it down. That limits how close the shelf above it can be. It'd be great if the bracket could slide straight in. Lastly, I need this project to be cheap to build. I mean, I spent all my money on clamps. So I want to build it all out of scraps. Scrap plywood, to be specific. I have a lot of it. So here's the idea I came up with. This is the wall. A plywood shelf standard will hang on the wall. The shelf standard will incorporate 2 hardwood dowels. The ones on the wall side are glued in. The ones in the front are removable. Then I can have a bracket like this. That'll hold 2 or 3 clamps. It'll slide in from the front and will hook under this dowel and ride on top of this dowel. And it'll support the weight of the clamps. Then to move the bracket, this dowel will slide out, the bracket can slide in, replace the dowel, and the bracket's in its new spot. Looks pretty good. The first step in building these clamp racks is to rip the pieces that are going to be the clamp brackets. Now those are going to be ripped 3 3/4 inches wide out of 3/4 inch plywood. Now I've got all shapes and sizes of scrap. The first thing that I did was I got all my scrap laid out, kind of mentally measured it and added it up to make sure I'd have enough pieces. Then I went and ripped 1 clean straight edge on every piece just to make sure. Now all I've got to do is just rip these pieces to width. After you have all the pieces cut to width, the next thing you want to do is cut them to length. And just the same as at the table saw, I want to cut off the kind of nasty end. This one was standing up on some concrete and it looks like it got wet. So I'm just going to trim the end of that off. And then I'll push this up to the stop block and cut this to length. And the length we want is 10 3/8 inches. Well, I wound up with 54 pieces that I think are good, usable pieces for the brackets. I've got one piece here that's got a pretty bad void in the edge. I found that as I was cutting them. I'm going to pull that out. We'll use that for a test or a setup piece. The void could weaken the plywood in that area, and I don't want to take that chance. And I've got 7 pieces here that were cut out of scraps, and the apparent grain of the plywood is running across the piece. That really doesn't make any difference, and I may wind up using these, but I kept them separate in case I decide not to. All right, we're ready for the next phase of the process, which is to start to shape these. And we want to do that so that these pieces all come out identical, but we've got to do it in such a way that it goes fast. So let's go see how we're going to set that up. Okay, the first thing that we want to do now is we want to make a little drilling guide. And this is going to be like a template to set up the drill press to use for all of our clamp support brackets. The first thing that I want to do is I want to get a line right down the middle of this board. And that should be at 1 7/8 inches. And the way to do that is to set up your square, and then you can just make a little pencil mark, flip your square over, and see if the little pencil mark is right on top of the previous one. And I'm off just a smidge there, so let's try this again. Yeah, there we go. Okay, that's perfect. Now what I want to do to get a nice sharp line though is I'm going to make an indentation, a small cut with my marking knife. And I'm going to make another one down here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this straight edge. And I'm sorry I'm left-handed, so some of this you're not going to be able to see too good. But basically what I'm doing is I'm going to put the knife edge in that little slash that I made. And as long as the knife edge falls into those 2 little cuts perfectly, then my blade is lined up. So I'm just going to make a mark here. Marking knife is super sharp, so we'll wind up with a good line there. It might be a little hard to see on the camera, but we've got a great line. Now, at this point, we can go ahead and label this bracket. This is going to be the top, and this is going to be the end. Now, what we want to do is from the end, we want to make our first hole at 1 13/32. Now, this is a right-handed ruler, so once again, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see. Let's see if we can do it this way. Maybe you'll be able to see it. 13/32 is going to be 3 less than half. 1, 2, 3, so it's going to be right there. And we'll just double check that. Yep, that's exactly right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my marking knife again, and I'm going to make a little indentation right there at the cross point of this line. And I'll just circle that so it's easy to see in the future. Now the next one is going to be at 3 21/32. So I'm trying to do this a little backwards here, but 16/32 is half, so we just count over an extra 5. Too far. Right there, and I'll put my little knife mark right there. And we'll circle that. So now these are going to be our first 2 holes, and those holes are going to be drilled with a Forstner bit, a 13/16 Forstner bit. Okay, now using the exact same technique as up here, what I did was I took this board, again this is the end, and this is the top. I had to erase my word top, I had written it too large, and I couldn't see my line. So what I did was I scored a line down here 7/16 inch from this top edge. 7/16 of an inch, scored the line. And we're taking all of our measurements off the end as a reference. So I've made 3 drilling marks. The first one is at 5 and 15/16. The second one is at 7 and 9/16, and the third one is at 9 and 3/16. And I've circled those. Those will be the beginnings of the 3 notches for our aluminum bar clamps. But I wanted to use this also for our pipe clamps. So I've measured from this end and made a mark at 6 and 17/32 and at 8 3/4 inches, and I labeled those are for the pipe clamp brackets. Now what we need to do is we're going to use this to set up the drill press to accurately drill the holes in all the rest of the blanks. So let's get going. In order to drill the holes in a repeatable and accurate fashion, and most importantly, quickly, I've set up 2 stop blocks. First thing I did was I positioned the fence so that the drill bit contacts at exactly the right point. Then I set up a stop block for this position, slide the board down, and the stop block is in the correct position for the next hole. So we're ready to start drilling. We've got a lot to drill. I'm going to put a backer block under this each time so that we don't get tear out on the back. And all we have to do now is just drill our holes through. Now these are 13/16 holes. And all we have to do now, I'm going to reposition the backer block a little bit, slide this down, and drill the next hole. And there we go. First 2 of many, many holes that need to be drilled. All right, we're getting set up now to drill the holes that we need for our notches for the clamps. Now, we had our guide board oriented this way before. I'm going to turn this around, and what I've done is I've set the stop block here to drill for this first hole for the aluminum pipe clamps. Then I've made a spacer block. I've labeled it so I get it in the same orientation every time. We'll put the spacer block in here, move this down, and we'll be able to drill this center hole. Then we'll remove the spacer block, move this down the rest of the way, and we'll catch this third hole here.
All right, now setting up to drill the starter holes for the notches for the pipe clamps is exactly the same, except we move our stop blocks down and use these marks that are labeled pipe. And what you'll notice in all of this is that the little starter hole that we made with the marking knife is perfect to line up the point of the Forstner bit. Now, we've lined up our stop for this pipe clamp notch and the stop for this pipe clamp notch. Also, we've changed over to a 1 3/16 inch Forstner bit. So other than putting a backer block underneath, we're pretty much ready to go here.
Well, we've drilled almost 300 holes so far, and we're not done yet. So before we clean up the drill press, let's turn our attention to the vertical supports or the shelf standards that will be holding these shelf brackets. So for our vertical support pieces, or the shelf standards as I'm calling them, we need pieces of plywood ripped to 4 7/8 inches wide. And that's all I'm doing now is just ripping scrap to size. Well, friends, the day is coming to an end and it's time to wrap things up. So far, we've cut 50 or so blanks for our clamp brackets, and we've drilled more than 250 holes. And in the next video, we're going to drill some more because we have to drill holes in the vertical uprights, or the standards as I'm calling them. Then we can get down to the business of assembling these new clamp racks and making some more space in the down-to-earth woodworking shop. I hope you'll come back for the next video. Thank you so much for watching this one. Look forward to seeing you